So Shaun, the new BRONZ album, Carried by the Storm, there's quite a story about that. Do you want to tell us more?
To put it in full perspective, I think we need to go back to the mid-80s when we as a band were touring the first album, Taken by Storm. We were on tour with a band called Rat, who had just gone to #1 in the charts in the States with their single Round and Round. And we're playing 45, 50,000 seated baseball stadiums, having a great time. At least I thought so, but there were problems internally within the band due to personal pressures with relationships. Anybody who's ever seen Spinal Tap can relate to that. You know, we had a Janine, etc. But anyway, the consequences of that whole situation, 2 guys quit. So we had to come back to the UK to reform. And whilst in England, unfortunately, Max the singer was poached by GTR, Steve Hackett's new band at that time, to do their album. So, cut a long story short, I ended up being the only original member of the first lineup, the first album, left in a situation to record a second album. So I reformed the band completely, a whole new lineup, and fortunately over a period of months managed to secure Clive Edwards on drums from UFO and Wild Horses, Mickey O'Donoghue on guitar from the band Grand Prix, a then unknown singer, Ian Baker, a very good-looking, charismatic guy with a great voice, on lead vocals, and Lee Reddings on bass. So we had top producer Max Norman, who was brought in to produce the album. He's done the Aussie albums of the 80s, Bark at the Moon, Diary of a Madman. He's done Megadeth albums. I mean, his credentials were top end, you know. So we had a great situation, a great producer, great band, great studio. So we set about writing and recording the second album, Carried by the Storm. Over many months, we finished the album basically. As we finished it, the record company went into receivership, which was a shock to all of us. We weren't that aware of there being that many problems, but obviously there were. The record company went bankrupt, so it caused the whole situation to be frozen. The tapes went into the official receiver's hands. So we were it was checkmate. We couldn't move left, right, up or down at that point in time as a band. But we did, fortunately, manage to secure the tapes from the official receiver and buy the rights to the recordings as a consequence. The album had been recorded digitally at the Roundhouse, which incidentally was the first album ever in Europe to be recorded digitally. And I've been informed as well it's the third album in the world to be recorded digitally. The only other 2 albums prior to this were one by Man for Man and one by Uriah Heep, which was fantastic, but it also was a problem because the only studio in Europe was the record company studio that had gone into receivership, so we couldn't use the masters. But we had bought the rights to the recording. I did have a lot of finished mixes and masters of the finished product, but it had never been compiled and finished as an album. So years went by, it sat on a shelf. I got a phone call one day from Ian, the singer, saying, "Shaun, you know, Lee has been given 6 months to live. He's got throat cancer." Well, that was a shock. Wow, you know, that kind of threw all of us to one side. You know, I suddenly thought, well, why don't I finish this album the way it should have been done and let him hear it the way he would want to have heard it, had it been released. So I did that. I went in my studio. I spent over periods of weeks compiling and mastering the album. Sent him the finished thing and the other guys in the band. And I got a phone call from him one day. He was in tears, very, very emotional, ecstatic to be able to hear this album finally finished. Unfortunately, Lee did die a few months later. It's very sad. But it was with that news of him becoming ill that got me to the stage of finishing this album. So having finished it, I suddenly thought, well, let's do something with it. Let's finally get it released. It deserved to be released. A lot of work had gone into it. So I got talking with a friend of mine in Switzerland, Nick Cale, publisher friend, played him the album. He was ecstatic. He couldn't believe, you know, how come nothing's ever happened with this album before? This is fantastic. Let's get it out there. So we've worked since, you know, middle of last year. We worked on getting a release. We got a release in the UK the 1st of January this year, 2010. It's just been released in the States on the 4th of July, 2010. We've had some fantastic reviews. It's been hailed as a lost classic. This is a genuine 80s album, recorded in the 80s, top level production, studio, the whole thing. Never been released, never been heard. And it's getting a lot of critical acclaim. We're all very excited by that. We're back up and running as a band again. All the guys are still vibrant, active, and in the music business. Here we are in 2010. Promoting a great record, writing new material, and you know, it's going to go from strength to strength. This album is a strong album. You need to check it out. It's called Carried by the Storm by BRONZ, and it's a genuine piece of the 80s here in 2010.